Picking up from page 16. Peplau pointed to research showing that despite stereotypes suggesting that gays and lesbians are unable to form stable relationships, same-sex couples are in fact indistinguishable from opposite-sex couples in terms of relationship quality and stability. Badgett testified that same-sex and opposite-sex couples are very similar in their most economic and demographic respects. Peplau testified the ability of same-sex couples to marry will have no bearing on whether opposite-sex couples choose to marry or divorce. Social epidemiologist Ilyan Meyer testified about the harm gays and lesbians have experienced because of Proposition 8. Meyer explained that Proposition 8 stigmatizes gays and lesbians because it informs gays and lesbians that the state of California rejects their relationships as less valuable than opposite-sex relationships. Proposition 8 also provides state endorsement of private discrimination. According to Meyer, Proposition 8 increases the likelihood of negative mental and physical health outcomes for gays and lesbians. Psychologist Michael Lamb testified that all available evidence shows that children raised by gay or lesbian parents are just as likely to be well-adjusted as children raised by heterosexual parents, and that the gender of a parent is immaterial as to whether an adult is a good parent. When proponents challenged Lamb with studies purporting to show that married parents provide the ideal child-rearing environment, Lamb countered that studies on child-rearing typically compare married opposite-sex parents to single parents or stepfamilies and have no bearing on families headed by same-sex couples. Lamb testified the relevant comparisons between families headed by same-sex couples and families headed by opposite-sex couples, and that the studies comparing these two family types show conclusively that having parents of different genders is irrelevant to child outcomes. Lamb and Blankenhorn disagreed on the importance of biological link between parents and children. Blankenhorn emphasized the importance of biological parents, relying on studies comparing children raised by married biological parents with children raised by single parents, unmarried mothers, stepfamilies, and cohabiting parents. As explained in the credibility determination, section 1 after this, none of the studies Blankenhorn relied on isolates the genetic relationship between a parent and a child as a variable to be tested. Lamb testified about studies showing that adopted children or children conceived using sperm and egg donors are just as likely to be as well adjusted as children raised by their biological parents. And Blankenhorn agreed with Lamb that adopted parents actually on some outcomes outstrip biological parents in terms of providing protective care for their children. Several experts testified the state of California and California's gay and lesbian populations suffer because domestic partnerships are not equivalent to marriage. Baggett explained that gays and lesbians are less likely to enter domestic partnerships than to marry, meaning fewer gays and lesbians have the protection of state-recognized relationship. Both Badgett and San Francisco economist Edmund Egan testified that the state receives greater economic benefits from marriage than from domestic partnerships. Meyer testified that domestic partnerships actually stigmatizes gays and lesbians even when enacted for the purpose of providing rights and benefits to the same-sex couples. Cott explained that domestic partnerships cannot substitute for marriage because domestic partnerships do not have the same social or historical meaning as marriage, and that much of the value of marriage comes from its social meaning. Peplau testified that little of the cultural esteem surrounding marriage adheres to domestic partnerships. To illustrate his opinion that domestic partnerships are viewed by society as different from marriage, Herrick pointed to a letter sent by the California Secretary of State to registered domestic partners in 2004, informing them of upcoming changes to the law and suggesting dissolution of their partnership to avoid any unwarranted financial effects. Herrick concluded that a similar letter to married couples would not have mentioned or suggested divorce. The expert's testimony on domestic partnership is consistent with the testimony of plaintiffs who explained that domestic partnerships do not satisfy their desire to marry. Steyer, who has a registered domestic partnership with Perry, explained that there is certainly nothing about domestic partnership that indicates the love and commitment that are inherent in marriage. Proponents did not challenge plaintiff's expert on the point that marriage is a socially superior status to domestic partnerships. Indeed, proponents stipulated that there is a significant symbolic disparity between domestic partnership and marriage. Proponents' cross-examination of several experts challenged whether people can be categorized based on their sexual orientation. Herrick, Meyer, and Badgett responded that sexual orientation encompasses behavior, identity, and attraction, and that most people are able to answer questions about their sexual orientation without formal training. According to the experts, researchers may focus on one element of sexual orientation depending on the purpose of the research, and sexual orientation is not a difficult concept for researchers to apply. As explained in the credibility determination, section 1 hereafter, and the findings of fact, section 1 below, the testimony shows that California has no interest in differentiating between same-sex and opposite-sex couples. Whether the evidence shows Proposition 8 enacted a private moral view without advancing legitimate government interest. The testimony of several witnesses disclosed that the primary purpose of Proposition 8 was to ensure that California confer a policy preference for opposite-sex couples over same-sex couples based on a belief that same-sex pairings are immoral and should not be encouraged in California. Historian George Chauncey testified about a direct relationship between the Proposition 8 campaign and initiative campaigns from the 1970s targeting gays and lesbians. Like earlier campaigns, the Proposition 8 campaign emphasized the importance of protecting children and relied on stereotypical images of gays and lesbians, despite the lack of any evidence showing that gays and lesbians pose a danger to children. Chauncey concluded that the Proposition 8 campaign did not need to explain what children would be protected from. The advertisements relied on a cultural understanding that gays and lesbians are dangerous to children. This understanding, Chauncey observed, is an artifact of the discrimination gays and lesbians faced in the United States in the 20th century. Chauncey testified that because homosexual conduct was criminalized, gays and lesbians were seen as criminals. The stereotype of gay people as criminals, therefore, became pervasive. Chauncey noted that stereotypes of gays and lesbians as predators or child molesters was reinforced in the mid-20th century and remained part of current public discourse. Lamb explained that this stereotype is not at all credible, as gays and lesbians are no more likely than heterosexuals to pose a threat to children. Political scientist Gary Segura provided many examples in ways in which private discrimination against gays and lesbians is manifested in law and policies. Segura testified that negative stereotypes about gays and lesbians inhibit political compromise with other groups. It is very difficult to engage in the give and take of the legislative process when you think that you are an inherently bad person. That's just not the basis for compromise and negotiation in the political process. Segura identified religion as the chief obstacle to gay and lesbian political advances. Political scientist Kenneth Miller disagreed with Segura's conclusion that gays and lesbians lack political power, pointed to some successes on a national and increased public support for gays and lesbians, but agreed that popular initiatives can easily tap into a strain of anti-minority sentiment, and that at least some voters supported Proposition 8 because of anti-gay sentiment. Proponent Hak-Shing William Tam testified about his role in the Proposition 8 campaign. Tam spent substantial time, effort, and resources campaigning for Proposition 8. As of July 2007, Tam was working with Protect Marriage to put Proposition 8 on the November 2008 ballot. Tam testified that he is the secretary of the American Return to God prayer movement, which operates the website onemanOnewoman.net. OnemanOnewoman.net encouraged voters to support Proposition 8 on grounds that homosexuals are 12 times more likely to molest children, and because Proposition 8 will cause states one by one to fall into Satan's hands. Tam identified NARTH, the National Association for Research and Therapy of Homosexuality, as the source of information about homosexuality because he believes in what they say. Tam identified the Internet as the source of information connecting same-sex marriage to polygamy and incest. Protect Marriage relied on Tam and, through Tam, used the website onemanOnewoman.net as part of the Protect Marriage Asian Pacific Islander outreach. Tam signed a statement of unity with Protect Marriage in which he agreed not to put forward independent strategies for public messaging. Khatami and Steyer testified about the effect Proposition 8 campaign advertisements had on their well-being. Khatami explained that he was angry and upset at the idea that children needed to be protected from him. After watching a Proposition 8 campaign message, Khatami stated that it just demeans you. It makes you feel like people are putting efforts into discriminating against you. Steyer, as the mother of 4 children, was especially disturbed at the message that Proposition 8 had something to do with protecting children. She felt that the campaign message was used to sort of try to educate people or convince people that there was a great evil to be feared and that the evil must be stopped and the evil is us, I guess. And the very notion that I could be part of what others need to protect their children from was just more than upsetting. It was sickening, truly. I felt sickened by that campaign. Egan and Badgett testified that Proposition 8 harms the state of California and its local governments economically. Egan testified that San Francisco faces direct and indirect economic harm as a consequence of Proposition 8. Egan explained that San Francisco lost and continues to lose money because Proposition 8 slashed the numbers of weddings performed in San Francisco. Egan explained that Proposition 8 decreases the number of married couples in San Francisco who tend to be wealthier than single people because of their ability to specialize their labor, pool resources, and access state and employer-provided benefits. Proposition 8 also increases the costs associated with discrimination against gays and lesbians. Proponents challenged only the magnitude and not the existence of the harms Egan identified. Badgett explained that municipalities throughout California and the state government face economic disadvantages similar to those Egan identified for San Francisco. For the reasons stated in the sections below, the evidence presented at trial fatally undermines the premises underlying proponents' preferred and proffered rationales for Proposition 8. An initiative measure adopted by the voters deserves great respect. The considered views and opinions of even the most highly qualified scholars and experts seldom outweigh the determination of the voters. When challenged, however, the voters' determinations must find at least some support in evidence. This is especially so when those determinations enact into law classifications of persons. Conjecture, speculation, and fears are not enough. Still less will the moral disapprobation of a group or class of citizens suffice, no matter how large the majority that shares that view. The evidence demonstrated beyond serious reckoning that Proposition 8 finds support only in such disapproval. As such, Proposition 8 is beyond the constitutional reach of the voters or their representatives. Credibility determinations. The plaintiff's witnesses. Plaintiffs presented the testimony of the 4 plaintiffs, 4 lay witnesses, and 9 expert witnesses. Proponents did not challenge the credibility of the lay witnesses or the qualifications of the expert witnesses to offer opinion testimony. Having observed and considered the testimony presented, the court concludes that the plaintiffs' lay witnesses provided credible testimony. 1. Jeffrey Zerillo, a plaintiff, testified about coming out as a gay man. Coming out is a very personal and internal process. You have to get to the point where you're comfortable with yourself, with your own identity, with who you are. Zerillo described his 9-year relationship with Katami. I love him probably more than I love myself. Paul Katami, a plaintiff, testified about his reasons for wanting to marry Zerillo. Being able to call him my husband is so definitive, it changes our relationship. I can safely say that if I were married to Jeff, that I know that the struggle that we have validating ourselves to other people would be diminished and potentially eradicated. Katami explained it was difficult for him to tell others about his sexual orientation, even though he's been gay for as long as he can remember. I struggled with it quite a bit, being surrounded by what seemed everything heterosexual. You tend to try and want to fit into that. Katami described how Proposition 8 campaign messages affected him. Protect the children is a big part of the Proposition 8 campaign, and when I think of protecting your children, you protect them from people who will perpetuate crimes against them, people who might get them hooked on a drug, a pedophile, or some person you need protecting from. You don't protect yourself from an amicable person or a good person. You protect yourself from things that can harm you physically or emotionally. And so insulting, even the insinuation that I would be part of that category. Kristen Perry, a plaintiff, testified about her relationship with Sire. Sire is maybe the sparkliest person I've ever met. The happiest I feel is in my relationship with her. Perry described why she wishes to marry. I want to have a stable and secure relationship with her that we can then include our children in. And I want the discrimination we are feeling with Proposition 8 to end and for a more positive, joyful part of our lives to begin. Perry described the reasons she and Star registered as domestic partners. We are registered domestic partners because on the just legal advice that we had received for establishing an estate plan. Sandra Starr, a plaintiff, testified about her relationship with Perry, with whom she raises their 4 children. I've fallen in love one time, and it's with Perry. Starr explains why she wants to marry Perry, despite their domestic partnership. There is certainly nothing about domestic partnership as an institution, or not even as an institution, but as a legal agreement that indicates the love and commitment that are inherent in marriage. And domestic partnership doesn't have anything to do for us with the nature of our relationship and the type of enduring relationship we want it to be. Helen Zia, a lay witness, testified regarding her experiences with discrimination and about how her life changed when she married her wife in 2008. I am beginning to understand what I've always read. Marriage is the joining of 2 families. Jerry Sanders, the mayor of San Diego and a lay witness, testified regarding how he came to believe that domestic partnerships were discriminatory. On a last-minute decision not to veto a San Diego resolution supporting same-sex marriage, he said, I was saying that one group of people did not deserve the dignity and respect, did not deserve the same symbolism about marriage. Ryan Kendall, a lay witness, testified about his experience as a teenager whose parents placed him in therapy to change his sexual orientation from homosexual to heterosexual. I knew I was gay. I knew that could not be changed. Kendall described the mental anguish he endured because of his family's disapproval of his sexual orientation. I remember my mother looking at me and telling me I was going to burn in hell. My mother would tell me that she hated me, or that I was disgusting, or that I was repulsive. Once she told me that she wished she'd had an abortion instead of a gay son. Hak Shing William Tang, an official proponent of Proposition 8 and an intervening defendant, was called as an adverse witness and testified about messages he disseminated during the Proposition 8 campaign. Question: did you invest substantial time and effort and personal resources in campaigning for Proposition 8? Answer: yes. Plaintiff called 9 expert witnesses. The education and experience of each expert showed plaintiff's experts were amply qualified to offer opinion testimony on the subjects identified. Moreover, the experts' demeanor and responsiveness showed their comfort with the subjects of their expertise. For those reasons, the court finds that each of the plaintiff's preferred experts offered credible opinion testimony on the subjects identified. Nancy Cott, a historian, testified as an expert in the history of marriage in the United States. Cott testified that marriage has always been a secular institution in the United States, that regulation of marriage eased the state's burden to govern an amorphous populace, and that marriage in the United States has undergone a series of transformations since the country was founded. A. Cott is a professor of American history at Harvard University and the director of the Schlesinger Library on History of Women in America. B. Cott received a Ph.D. from Brandeis University in the history of American civilization. C. Cott has published 8 books, including Public Vows, A History of Marriage in the Nation, and has published numerous articles and essays. D. Cott devoted a semester in 1998 to researching and teaching a course at Yale University in the history of marriage in the United States. And E. Cott's marriage scholarship focuses on marriage as a public institution and as a structure regulated by government for social benefit. George Chauncey, a historian, was qualified to offer testimony on social history, especially as it relates to gays and lesbians. Chauncey testified about the widespread private and public discrimination faced by gays and lesbians in the 20th century and the ways in which Proposition 8 campaign echoed that discrimination and relied on stereotypes against gays and lesbians that had developed in the 20th century. A. Chauncey is a professor of history and American studies at Yale University. From 1991 to 2006, Chauncey was a professor of history at the University of Chicago. B. Chauncey received a Ph.D. in history from Yale University in 1989. C. Chauncey has authored or edited books on the subject of gay and lesbian history, including Gay New York, Gender, Urban Culture, and the Making of the Gay Male World, and Hidden from History, Reclaiming the Gay and Lesbian Past. Chauncey relies on government records, interviews, diaries, films, and advertisements, along with studies by other historians and scholars in conducting his research. And E. Chauncey teaches courses in 20th century United States history, including courses on lesbian and gay history. Lee Badgett, an economist, testified as an expert on demographic information concerning gays and lesbians, same-sex couples, and children raised by gays and lesbians, the effects of the inclusion of same-sex couples, the effects of the exclusion of same-sex couples from the institution of marriage, and the effect of permitting same-sex couples to marry on heterosexual society and the institution of marriage. Badgett offered 4 opinions. 1. Proposition 8 has inflicted substantial economic harm on same-sex couples and their children. 2. Allowing same-sex couples to marry would not have any adverse effect on the institution of marriage or on opposite-sex couples. 3. Same-sex couples are very similar to opposite-sex couples in most economic and demographic respects. And 4. Proposition 8 has imposed economic losses on the state of California and on California counties and municipalities. A. Badgett is a professor of economics at UMass Amherst and the director of the Williams Institute of UCLA School of Law. The Williams Institute at UCLA School of Law. B. Badgett received a Ph.D. in economics from UC Berkeley in 1990. C. Badgett has written 2 books on gay and lesbian relationships and same-sex marriage, Money, Myth, Change, The Economic Lives of Lesbians and Gay Men, And when gay people get married, what happens when society legalizes same-sex marriage? Badgett has also published several articles on the same subject. Badgett co-authored 2 reports: The Impact of Extending Marriage to Same-Sex Couples in the California Budget, and Putting a Price on Equality, the Impact of Same-Sex Marriage on California Budget, analyzing the fiscal impact of allowing same-sex couples to marry in California. Badgett has been invited to speak at many universities and at the American Psychological Association Convention on the Economics of Same-Sex Relationships. And F. Badgett has testified before federal and state government bodies about domestic partner benefits and anti-discrimination laws. Edmund A. Egan, the chief economist of the San Francisco Comptroller's Office, testified for CCSF as an expert in urban and regional economic policy. Egan conducted an economic study of the prohibition of same-sex marriage on San Francisco's economy and concluded that the prohibition negatively affects San Francisco's economy in many ways. A. As the chief economist for CCSF, Egan directs the Office of Economic Analysis and prepares economic impact analysis report for pending legislation. B. In preparing economic impact report, Egan relies on government data and reports, private reports, independent research to determine whether legislation has real regulatory power and the effects of that legislation on private behavior. C. Egan received a PhD in city and regional planning from UC Berkeley in 1997, and D. Egan is an adjunct faculty member at UC Berkeley and teaches graduate students on regional and urban economics and regional and city planning. 5. Letitia Peploe, the psychologist, was qualified as an expert on couple relationships within the field of psychology. Peploe offered 4 opinions. 1. For adults who choose to enter marriage, that marriage is often associated with many important benefits. 2. Research has shown remarkable similarities between same-sex and opposite-sex couples. 3. If same-sex couples are permitted to marry, they will likely experience the same benefits to marriage as opposite-sex couples. And 4. Permitting same-sex couples will not harm. Permitting same-sex couples marriage will not harm opposite-sex marriage. Peploe is a professor of psychology and vice chair of graduate studies in psychology at UCLA. Peploe's research focuses on social psychology, which is a branch of psychology that focuses on human relationships and social influence. Specifically, Peploe studies close personal relationship, sexual orientation, and gender. Peploe began studying same-sex relationships in the 1970s, and Peploe has authored or edited about 10 books, authored about 120 peer-reviewed articles, and published literature reviews on psychology, relationships, and sexuality. 6. Ilian Meyer, a social epidemiologist, testified as an expert in public health with a focus on social psychology and psychiatric epidemiology. Meyer offered 3 opinions. 1. Gay and lesbians experience stigma, and Proposition 8 is an example of that stigma. 2. Social stressors affect gays and lesbians. And 3. Social stressors negatively affect the mental health of gays and lesbians. Meyer is an associate professor of socio-medical sciences at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. Meyer received a PhD in socio-medical sciences from Columbia University in 1993. Meyer studies the relationship between social issues and structures and patterns of mental health outcomes with a specific focus on lesbian, gay, and bisexual populations. Meyer has published about 40 peer-reviewed articles, teaches a course on gay and lesbian issues in public health, has received numerous awards for his professional work, and has edited and reviewed journals and books. 7. Gregory Herrick, a psychologist, testified as an expert in social psychology with a focus on sexual orientation and stigma. Herrick offered opinions concerning 1. The nature of sexual orientation and how sexual orientation is understood in the field of psychology and psychiatry. 2. The amenability of sexual orientation to change through intervention. And 3. The nature of stigma and prejudice as they relate to sexual orientation and Proposition 8. Herrick is a professor of psychology at UC Davis. Herrick received a PhD in personality and social psychology from UC Davis in 1983. Social psychology is the intersection of psychology and sociology in that it focuses on human behavior within a social context. Herrick's dissertation focused on heterosexuals' attitudes towards lesbians and gay men. Herrick regularly teaches a course on sexual orientation and prejudice. Herrick serves on an editorial boards of peer-reviewed journals and has published over 100 articles and chapters on sexual orientation, stigma, and prejudice. Michael Lamb, a psychologist, testified as an expert on the developmental psychology of children, including the developmental psychology of children raised by gay and lesbian parents. Lamb offered 2 opinions. 1. Children raised by gays and lesbians are just as likely to be well-adjusted as children raised by heterosexual parents. 2. Children of gay and lesbian parents would benefit if their parents were to marry. Lamb is a professor and head of the Department of Social and Developmental Psychology at the University of Cambridge in England. Lamb was the head of the section on social and emotional development of the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development in Washington for 17 years. 3. Lamb has published approximately 500 articles, many about child adjustment, and has edited 40 books in developmental psychology, reviews about 100 articles a year, and serves on the editorial boards on several academic journals. Lamb received his PhD from Yale University in 1976. Gary Segura, a political scientist, testified as an expert on the political power or powerlessness of minority groups in the United States and of gays and lesbians in particular. Segura offered 3 opinions. 1. Gay and lesbians do not possess a meaningful degree of political power. 2. Gays and lesbians possess less power than groups granted judicial protection. And 3. The conclusions drawn by proponents expert Miller are troubling and unpersuasive. Segura is a professor of political science at Stanford University and received a PhD in political science from the University of Illinois in 1992. Segura and a colleague through the Stanford Center for Democracy operates the American National Election Studies, which provides political scientists with data about the American electorate's views about politics. Segura serves on the editorial boards of major political science journals. Segura's work focuses on political representation and whether elected officials respond to the voting public within the field of political representation. Segura focuses on minorities. Segura has published about 25 peer-reviewed articles, authored about 15 chapters in edited volumes, and has presented between 20 and 40 conferences in the past 10 years. Segura has published 3 pieces specific to gay and lesbian politics and political issues. Segura identified the methods he used and the materials he relied on to form his opinions in this case. Relying on his background as a political scientist, Segura read literature on gay and lesbian politics, examined the statutory status of gays and lesbians and political attitudes about gays and lesbians, determined the presence or absence of gays and lesbians in political office, and considered ballot initiatives about gays and lesbian issues. The proponents' witnesses. Proponents elected not to call the majority of their designated witnesses to testify at trial and called not a single official proponent of Proposition 8 to explain the discrepancies between the arguments in favor of Proposition 8 presented to voters and the arguments presented in court. Proponents informed the court on the first day of trial, January 11, 2010, that they were withdrawing Lauren Marks, Paul Nathanson, Daniel N. Robinson, and Catherine Young as witnesses. Proponents' counsel stated in court Friday, January 15, 2010, that their witnesses, or that they were witnesses, because they were extremely concerned about their personal safety and they did not want to appear with any recording of any sort whatsoever. The timeline shows, however, that proponents failed to make any effort to call their witnesses after the potential for public broadcast in this case had been eliminated. The Supreme Court issued a temporary stay of transmission on January 11, 2010, and a permanent stay on January 13, 2010. The court withdrew the case from the Ninth Circuit's pilot program on broadcasting on January 15, 2010. Proponents affirmed the withdrawal of their witnesses that same day. Proponents did not call their first witness until January 25, 2010. The record does not reveal the reason behind proponents' failure to call their expert witnesses. Proponents entered into evidence the deposition testimony of two of the proponents' withdrawn witnesses as their testimony supported plaintiff's claim. Catherine Young was to testify on comparative religion and the universal definition of marriage. Paul Nathanson was to testify on religious attitudes towards Proposition 8. Young had been a professor of religious studies at McGill University since 1978. She received her Ph.D. in History of Religions and Comparative Religions from McGill in 1978. Young testified at her deposition that homosexuality is a normal variant of human sexuality and that same-sex couples possess the same desire for love and commitment as opposite-sex couples. Young also explained that several cultures around the world and across centuries have had variations of marital relationships for same-sex couples. Nathanson had a Ph.D. in religious studies from McGill University and is a researcher at McGill's Faculty for Religious Studies. Nathanson is also a frequent lecturer on consequences of marriage for same-sex couples and gender and parenting. Nathanson testified at his deposition that religion lies at the heart of the hostility and violence directed at gays and lesbians, and that there is no evidence that children raised by same-sex couples fare worse than children raised by opposite-sex couples. Proponents made no effort to call Young or Nathanson to explain the deposition testimony that plaintiffs had entered into the record, or to call any of the withdrawn witnesses after potential for contemporaneous broadcasts of the trial proceedings had been eliminated. Proponents called two witnesses: David Blankenhorn, founder and president